Good morning and welcome to Evaluation as a Tool for Success, Session 3. This session is called Creating Your Evaluation. I'm so happy that you're all here. If you are new to the New Jersey Council for the Humanities, welcome. We're thrilled to have you. We are the state level partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities. We work all over the state of New Jersey on public humanities programs. Our mission and our work is to support and advocate for the public humanities in New Jersey. And we are thrilled to continue to do that work in partnership with the National Endowment for the Humanities, many amazing cultural institutions around the state, as well as the New Jersey state government. So thrilled to have you all here and to be part of In the Weeds. In the Weeds is our capacity building and skill building series for organizations that do humanities work. Today's session specifically is being facilitated by me. My name is Gigi Naglak. I am the Director of Programs here at the New Jersey Council for the Humanities. And our wonderful programs intern for this year, Montrell Sanders. Montrell is a PhD student in public affairs at Rutgers Camden and himself an evaluation expert. Montrell, do you want to say hi?
Good morning, everybody. So glad you all could join us today.
Awesome. He'll be leading the majority of discussion in our session. Evaluation as a tool for success, session 3, creating your evaluation. Like I said, this is the last in a 3-part series about evaluation, effectively leveraging evaluations to build impactful humanities programs. Session 1 was about planning for evaluation with a deep dive into logic models as a tool for planning. In session 2, we talked more about methodologies and going into detail on a few different methodologies in particular that we see in a lot of humanities programs and are particularly helpful in evaluating humanities programs. The idea behind this session is that we're going to start to pull all of that together. We hope that many of you have brought a program that you wish to evaluate and think about evaluating, or a topic that you'd like to evaluate that is, trench into your work so that we can actually work on developing your program evaluation in real time. So the goal for this session is for you to be able to have an evaluation, the start of an evaluation at the very least, the draft of an evaluation, ready to go so that you can bring it back to your colleagues and peers and get that evaluation started right away. If you missed any of the other sessions or any other In the Weeds sessions that we have, this is a regular series that we do at NJCH. We now have a page on our website called In the Weeds, and you can access information about upcoming programs. You can access recordings and materials of past programs, and you can find that at njhumanities.org on our website under programs. And I'm going to put the link to that spot in the chat as well. So, yep, recordings, materials for all the past sessions are there. And there's also a spot there to make suggestions for future sessions. So if there's a topic, a skill that you would particularly like to build or a topic that you'd like to explore, we really recommend, we'd rather be responsive to our community's needs than try to, sort of blindly run in the dark and figure out what you might need. We love ideas that you have, and we'll do our best to get a session together in the next few months if we can do that. So I want us to get started. I don't want to take too much more time, but I do want to make a caveat that we've sort of made in each of these evaluation sessions. We're gathered here today for about an hour and 15 minutes. That is not even close to enough time to go into everything we possibly could about evaluation. It's a huge topic. And we really recommend that you continue to think about how evaluation can be done effectively. We're giving you these resources on our website as well for additional reading and additional ways to look for information. We're also offering the opportunity for you to have a one-on-one meeting with our wonderful Montrell Sanders. If you'd like to talk much more specifically about some of the work that you're doing or questions you might have about methodologies or planning, anything evaluation related, for the remainder of his internship through the end of July. I'll get to that more a little bit later. What we're really focusing on today is strategies that are particularly useful in public humanities work, and also focusing on work that you can do if you're not an evaluation expert, if you don't, unfortunately, have the funding or the ability to bring in an outside expert. So this is just a place to get you started, and I hope that this will be just the beginning of your evaluation journey. But without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to you, Montreal Sanders, to get us started on our program. Thanks.
Yes, no, perfect. Yes. And just building off of that, whenever you can, please hire an evaluation expert to come in and do your evaluations for you, because they give you such deep and rich knowledge. But yes, these programs are just designed to allow you to put a pulse on your program and determine like your next steps, whether you need to bring somebody else in, whether you're doing well. So from today's session, we're really just kind of bringing it all full circle and bringing it together. Within the first session, we gave you just an intro to evaluation and kind of a framework to work from using logic models. And in that second session, as she already said, we gave you some methodologies and tools to put in your toolkit that you can use within evaluation. But today, we really are aiming to, again, bring that full circle and teach you how to put all that together. And so one of the first things that you're going to want to do, or what you're going to want to focus on, is determining what constitutes success across all groups. So within projects and within organizations, there are like a number of stakeholders who have a vested interest in your project. So when it comes to building your evaluation, you need to think about how each of these stakeholders view success for the project that you are undertaking. So for example, success for communities will look a lot different than success for board members or even your organization. So by focusing on this, it allows you to think about how you will determine what success looks like for your evaluation. So for using this evaluation session as an example, I want to pose a question to you guys. What do you all view as success for this program? Like, what are you looking to get out of it?
Well, I'll start. I'll say what, and I'm sorry I missed the session, which I will go back and look at. But what I was specifically interested in is what are some non-traditional. I know how to do surveys. I know how to do focus groups, you know, that kind of thing. That's because that's my own background. But in terms of other ways to assess engagement, so I wanted to learn more about maybe observational techniques. And so I'm looking forward to looking at that recording so I can get that information. So that would, to me, if I could learn that and learn how to implement that, that would be my measure of success.
Absolutely. So within that example, we see that for Sam, success for this evaluation program looks at learning different ways of doing evaluations. But now if we're looking at Gigi, who is the director of programs here at NJCH, what would you constitute as success for this program?
That's a great question, Monty. And as you know, you and I have talked about this as well. For us, it's really In the Weeds is a series that's, you know, designed to help people who do public humanities work, and especially people, small organizations or volunteer-driven organizations who might not have the kind of professional staff that they would ideally love to have. So for me, success of this is really would be measured by giving people a skill that they didn't have. I'm thinking, Sam, when your answer was really about expanding skills that you do have, right? You are in fact an evaluation expert, right? You're a social scientist, an evaluator. So you're thinking about different kinds of skills. For me, it's about how have we succeeded in giving people skills that they did not previously have. So that's, yeah, I love that question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then even for myself, success looks like getting people in the door and giving you all the information and knowledge that I have. So across 3 different groups, the program director, the program facilitator, and even the program participant, we each have different ideas of what success looks like for this program. So you're going to have the same thing happening within your programs, your board of directors, your organization executive director, yourselves, and even your participant. You're all going to look at success differently. And so this is kind of what you want to be thinking about when you are designing your evaluation. And this will help give you a baseline to like gauge your success. So once you have been able to reconcile what success looks like for stakeholders, for your boss, for yourself, and for your participants, you can begin to incorporate that into the outcomes portion of your logic model. Because, you know, if you only focus on one, then you get a really skewed idea of what success looks like. And if you're only focusing on one and you don't meet that goal, so say you had a boss who was only looking at increasing participation within a program, and you didn't do that, you could consider your program a failure, despite the fact that for the people who were there, it might have been the best thing that ever happened. So you really want to be looking across groups at what success is so that you don't really get bogged down into just one idea of what success can be. So, yeah, there we go. So from this, you can use your outcomes from that logic model as a starting point, especially if you've given consideration to what success looks like. So this is why I love the logic model as a framework for creating evaluations. Again, the logic model is not the only way that creating evaluations can be done. I'm pretty sure there are other ways to approach an evaluation, but for myself and for this program, we're going with the logic model. So the outcomes that you will have identified from yourself and from looking across groups are informed by different stakeholders and the definitions of success. And these outcomes guide you on what you're measuring and help determine the best way to measure it. So measuring demographics is going to look a lot different than measuring how someone felt about the program attended. And they're also going to give you different methodologies for thinking about that. Measuring demographics can be simply put into surveys or depicted quantitatively, whereas how someone felt about it, this is going to either be in an interview and it's going to be depicted much differently. So then some other considerations, aside from what success looks like, is also formulating the questions. Formulating the questions is one of the most important parts of your evaluation. Figuring out the best questions to ask it's difficult, but it's important. When doing this, you want to ask questions that are going to get you answers. You're going to want to get an answer that helps you, but you don't want to influence answers when you're designing your questions. So this can be done. Influence comes in the form of asking leading questions like, does an infant car seat help you? Does an infant car seat seem safer than something else? You're giving someone an idea in their mind about what an answer could be. And you're also biasing the question because you don't know. So if a person doesn't use a car seat, which I don't know much about children, so this is like a terrible example for me to use, but if someone's not using a car seat, it's kind of like you're putting a value judgment on that. Another way that questions can influence are double-barreled questions. So you don't want to ask questions that have two different things that you're looking at. So if you were to ask the question, how does pay and how does benefits influence your job perception? With that question, however they answer, you're not really able to parse out whether job benefits has more of an impact than pay does. So you're going to want to parse those out and make sure that both of those questions are asked separately so that you can actually get the information. And then there's also really thinking about making sure that you're asking the question that you think you're asking. So the question I learned something new today versus I learned something today can get at very different answers from people. So you really want to pay close attention to how you word your questions so that you make sure you're measuring what you think you're measuring. And then you're also going to want to test your questions repeatedly. So once you make your survey, you don't want to just send it out into the world for people to use. You're going to want to run it by some people. I know the way we do it in JCH, I'll come up with some questions and then I run them by Gigi. And I think this gets at inner rate or reliability because of the fact that before it's gone out, it's got two sets of eyes on it. So I might think that I'm asking a question a certain way, but by somebody else looking at it, they're able to look at that question and be like, all right, well, it can go three different ways if you really word it this way. How about we change it this way? You don't want just one set of eyes on it. You want a couple people looking at it, or at least just one more person to look at this before it goes out.
Can I just add one more thing in there?
Yeah, absolutely.
About how we, when we're doing evaluations, Montreal often will send them to me, of course, and then we often send them out to people who are as disconnected from NJCH as we possibly can be. So we'll send them to colleagues in totally different fields and see how they respond to those questions. Make sure the answers make sense, get their feedback on how we've asked the question, just to make sure, like we were saying, about that we're asking the question in a way that makes sense to other people. Obviously, it definitely makes sense to us, but to other people it may not. Using the example, that Monty gave a minute ago about did you learn something today versus did you learn something new today? Both of those are good questions. Both of them can give you good information. But it becomes a question then about saying, is it very important to us that somebody learn something new? Are we trying to make sure that they learn something new? Or are we just trying to make sure that there was learning that accomplished? That's a very simple and perhaps overly simple example, but nonetheless gives I think a pretty good window into what we're talking about when we're saying thinking about how you word your questions is really important. That's all.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. When I sit down to write these questions, a first draft can take anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half, just because words mean things. They do. And the words that you choose, the words you use, the way you word these sentences, like they really have an impact. And so it takes you a minute. I'm hoping that this gets easier as we go along, or as I go along in this, but I kind of enjoy the process. It's kind of fun being a little wordsmith. So anyway, moving forward, even very straightforward data collection deserves thought for how you want to collect it. So for an example, if you're thinking about demographics, if you are collecting the age of participants, do you want them to input their exact age? Do you want to give them a checkoff box that includes an age range? Do you want to do it by year of birth? We had actually a really robust discussion about this a couple of weeks ago, thinking about all the ways that these come out, because people, the way you put this down will determine the way that they answer this question. Even when it comes to race and ethnicity, do you do a self-input where you allow people to write their own race in, or do you give them a list of choices? It's easy to aggregate data with the list, but with that list, you kind of, I don't want to say you alienate people, but if you do just a drop-down list, since race is like such a nuanced category and there's like all these different fusions going on, like, do you miss the chance of getting that data and offending someone by not having their race there? Even thinking about the flip side of that, when you let someone self-select, you get some wonky answers that come up. Some people will comply and they'll write things in, but then you get people who put human or write really mean things in the box, like, why does this even matter? There's the pros and cons of all of this. We said age and ethnicity, they're deeply personal and often complex. So it's best when you can to allow people to self-identify by leaving the box open, so it can be empowering. But then it gives you a way to, then you have to figure out how to aggregate the data in a meaningful way, because like we said, since it's so complex, a lot of different things come up. So just many considerations when you're determining how to collect that data.
Can I jump in with one more quick story here? Because I thought it was a good one. I want to talk a little bit about how that question we had internally about how we were going to collect age data. The reason it became such a complex question, and this goes back to like planning your evaluation, like what are you evaluating and to what end? For a single program, it can be very helpful for us to just, we tend to use the ranges of ages, right? So from under 18, 19 to 25, whatever ranges we've decided. And that works great for a lot of programs that we run. That's all the information we need. We're interested in sort of cohorts of ages. We want to compare that to some national data that's collected in similar ways. So cool, great, that works great. Except if we want to look at how people have engaged with our programs over time. We hope that in certain cases, people will be coming back to our programs again and again and again and again. So we can, in theory, look at that as a series of individual programs, but of course, people's ages will change in that individual program. So there is a certain benefit if we know that we're going to be going back to the same people again and again and again. If we ask something like year of birth, we can track their age for them. They don't end up in different categories at different times. I've been thinking about this in my life, it's become very trenchant in my life because on my last birthday, I am usually now suddenly in a new category, which is a little disturbing, to be perfectly honest. I'm not sure one becomes no longer a young adult, but I'm definitely out of it at this point. So yeah, thinking about how that's going to, how that might need to change in your own data over time is something that, or depending on the kind of evaluation you wish to do, the kind of program that it is, there may be different answers, all of which make sense in certain categories, in certain contexts.
Absolutely, yeah. And things happen. This is, as always, this is an iterative process. So you will learn as you go. I've learned from these last couple of evaluations, like I said, we have this robust conversation on how to collect this demographic data, the best ways to go. And I'm hoping that I'll continue learning how to do that as we go forward. But it's a trial and error, and it's not the end of the world if you don't get it correctly right, completely right the first time. But, you know, just keep moving forward. So then how to read and use the data that you've collected. I think that this is one of the most important pieces of the evaluation, because the earlier pieces, they're really important. Your framework, you're thinking about your outcomes and your questions that you're asking, formulating these questions, even the methodologies that you're going to use to inform this. But when you've collected that data, reading and collecting that data is just really important, because this is the story. Like this data that you're going to use is used to tell a story. That is the most important portion of this. It's not just enough to collect this data and have these graphs and these charts and these like pulled out quotes sitting around, but you need to be able to use them to tell a story. You need to be able to use them to say, this is why I deserve more funding. This is the impact that my program is having. This is why we need to do this program again and again, or change the way this program goes. The data will help you build that case. And this is why I looked at it. Like, it's so good for that. So with these interactive methods, they usually come in the form of quantitative and qualitative. I think that's all the way around. But your quantitative data is going to refer to data that is numerical in nature. So this would include your demographic and attendance data, and even some of your survey data, depending on how you go down that route when you're thinking about it. This type of data can be aggregated or, you know, all put together and depicted in the form of a graph to better display impact and change over time. So, you know, if you're collecting demographic data, this is really good to collect demographic data, because you can say, these are the people that I'm serving, these are the people that I'm not serving, and create a plan to better serve those people. But if you consistently collect this data over time, 5 years from now, you can be able to use that data to say, you know, when this program first started, we were only connecting with this demographic and this one was missing. But tracking this data over time, we were able to see that our program has increased interaction with this population over here, and we were able to better serve them. That's really powerful, especially if you have a grant that, you know, is given over time, especially if you have a program and you're fighting for funding within your group. This data will be able to, you know, it might make or break whether or not you get more funding, whether your program gets chopped. So this is why I stress that collecting and aggregating and like displaying this data is important. When it comes to qualitative data, this is data that deals with qualities or characteristics. So this would include data that tells how the audience felt or experienced the program. And this type of data is depicted in a narrative format and involves you reading over the information to find commonalities among participant experiences. So qualitative data, it seems scarier in nature. I think it's like one of two reasons why. Either some people just they're not people persons. So people will shy away from qualitative data in that respect, because it does involve you being people forward. It involves you having to talk to people, being cognizant of changes in people's body language or whatnot like that when you're asking questions. And then it is also, oh, okay. And then the analysis portion of that, you have to go back and read over that and find the common patterns among the data that you have to be able to tell a story that's like somewhat generalizable. It's not always going to be generalizable just because low samples and you just can't really do it, but it is able to help you tell a story. And so, where was I going with that? I'm so sorry. Oh yeah, so depicted in this narrative format. So this is why I argue for the mixed methods portion of it, because, you know, as we were saying earlier, you can use that quantitative data, the graphs, to show change over time, but then that qualitative data, it can show the qualities or how people felt about that program. So, you know, if I have this graph, like I said, going back to that example of over 5 years time, we were able to see that impact with X community grew substantially. And then you can come back for a little bit of razzle dazzle with the qualitative data to be like, when we talk to that group, we were able, when we talked to that group, these are some of the things that were said by this group about what it meant for them to be included, for us to reach out to them, for them to be able to engage with our organization. And it paints a more robust picture. Mixed methods, you don't have to do it. Quantitative or qualitative data both get the job done when trying to tell your story. But it's going to be up to you when you're picking methods to decide what kind of story you want to tell from the data that you picked. And then also between the two, you have to think about your outliers. So when it comes to quantitative data, we normally don't pay attention to the outliers because these are people or data that's just way off from the aggregate that we have. So I think an easy example of an outlier in qualitative data, if you're thinking about age and you have a program that is mostly served, you have a nice little curve, it's mostly served by Mercury's in retrograde, I'm so sorry. If you're right, if you're thinking about attendance along the age range, and you know your organization, so let's say that this program gathers, you know, we've got 5 to 6 youth in the age range of like 18 to 20. The majority of your people are going to be within the middle, like 30 to 40. And then you have this one person who attended who was like 75 because it was a good day for them. It was beautiful. They just happened to be walking by. You're not really going to do much with that. You're not going to be like, oh yes, we're out here reaching people 75 and above because you have that one person. So we kind of ignore the outliers in quantitative data. But when it comes to qualitative, it can be powerful to think about that outlier. Because you can talk to that person and be like, well, what did this program mean to you? And you might find out that, oh, I haven't been outside in like 20 years. And this is the first time I've been out. And this program was just so wonderful. And it was good because X, Y, and Z. You can find out why that was, and then maybe tailor your program to be able to speak more to an older demographic because of this fact that like it was so well spoken. Yeah, ooh, that was a long tangent. I can go into more about that later though, if anyone has any questions. I'll actually pause a moment for questions because I've been talking for a minute and I've gone over a lot. Does anyone have any questions so far about anything before I continue forward with the observational methods and how to depict that data?
I do, actually, if
Okay.
you don't mind.
Let's go.
I'm sort of intrigued by this idea of outliers,
Mhm.
right? And how I see what you're saying about, you know, in general, anything that's outside of a majority when you're talking about quantitative data is outside of a majority where you're often looking at when you're trying to aggregate data. I think it seems to me that there's that what you're talking about, if you can gather information about the outliers,
Yeah.
could be an opportunity to point your program in a slightly different direction if you wanted to. Am I understanding that correctly of what you're
Yes,
saying?
no, yeah,
Does that make sense?
absolutely. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So yeah, that's that absolutely does make a lot of sense. So that's kind of what I was meaning about the example with the 175-year-old person that might have showed up to that
Right.
program. If you're thinking about the outlier in that sense and you're using a mixed methods way of approaching your evaluation, while quantitatively that data might not mean anything, for the qualitative, it could mean a lot. If you sit down and talk to that person and find out what this program meant to them in terms of social capacity, mental capacity, just in terms of getting out in general, then you're absolutely right. You can use it to inform programs. You might see that there is an area where you, number one, identify that there's a population that you can engage with, the older generation, and you can start to think about tailoring programs towards them because of what this one person or this one program as one person has told you about how this program meant to them. So absolutely, outliers can be used to inform new programs.
I would also say that for that example, when you're looking at people who attend, who are on either they're young or younger than the norm or older than the norm, you also want to find out if you can, how did they come across your program? Because if it turns out that it's something that does have a broader appeal than you originally thought, but maybe your outreach methods aren't reaching a broader group, and it was just, I happen to be walking by might be one thing, and maybe you want to put big banners or something out, whatever, or turns out that this person lives in a senior complex. Well, would you be at, maybe I should go over there, I should put flyers there, I should talk about how to make it more accessible. There's, yeah, I mean, not just that it was valuable to them. I mean, if it isn't valuable to them, maybe you don't want to pursue all of that. But if it was, you may learn a lot about how to reach people that you just didn't think about trying to reach.
Totally.
Yeah, absolutely. And that really, that also applies to like when you're thinking about demographics. Someone in the last session gave this wonderful example about how there was a church and the church wanted to do more outreach within the community, but it had been there for a while, and like just the way the space was set up in that church wasn't really welcoming. And so people in the community weren't engaging. So yes, this is really good for thinking about how you can, with that outreach portion of it, how you can go out and draw people into the fold. I hate that word. Draw people into your to your program and into your organization. So yes, absolutely, with outreach, with programming.
You're reminding me also of a program I ran many years ago in a museum. We ran a First Fridays program, right? So first Friday of the month, we had a program, and it was targeting adults. So adults who were already in the part of the city that had a First Friday program, could we bring them into the museum? It was very successful for that. And we found that, food and beverage brought people in a lot, particularly our beer programs, those are big. But one year, so we always found that food and beverage programs were great. And then one year we ended up doing, it was in December. So First Friday in December, we did a partnership with a candy maker, and we did a candy program. And we had the largest attendance we'd ever had. And it was because there were kids.
Yeah.
So we were like, oh, of course, kids come. So kids can have candy, kids can't have beer. This makes total sense. But actually, when we started talking to people about it, it wasn't just, it wasn't that just like, yeah, kids can eat candy, but also parents were looking for opportunities where they and their kids could have an experience. So it was actually more nuanced than we had particularly realized. They were specifically looking for intergenerational experiences. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm seeing what you said, like having the opportunity to get more deeply into why did we suddenly have a whole bunch of kids under the age of 10, there. We were able to gather some more information about that. So, hey, look, I had some experience with this in the past.
Oh, look at that. Okay. Cool.
Sorry to interrupt you. Please continue.
No. I love these examples because like I can put them in my memory bank and draw them out later when I need to throw an example out about this stuff. So this is wonderful. Okay. So then the observational methods for evaluation. These really depend in nature on how you want to depict those. So with exhibition and event surveys, these are normally quantitative in nature, and they should be depicted in a graph just to be able to show that data. And when I say they should be, when I say they're quantitative in nature and they should be, this is just what comes to my mind. But you can always make the argument for doing it in a qualitative nature and depicting the commonalities among the participants. So like with the recent survey that we did, it's the first time normally when I think about surveys, I think about surveys on a Likert scale model of like a strongly agree to strongly disagree, or like on a scale of 1 to 5, how did you feel about this? And I think this one we're really looking at doing a mixed method survey of like having those Likert scale questions, but then also having open-ended response questions of like 3 to 5 sentences. We're gonna see how it works out, but this is why I say it should be quantitative in nature. It's how it's normally done. It's just the Likert scale model of it. When it comes to visitor observation, these are definitely quantitative in nature because you're looking at who's coming into your program, genders, demographics, all that good stuff. And as we said last week, you kind of have to take this with a grain of salt because of how fluid everything is in terms of race and gender and age lines and all that good stuff. But these are normally qualitative in nature and they should be depicted in the form of a graph. When it comes to visitor tracking, these can be quantitative or qualitative now that I'm thinking about it in nature, especially when, but depending upon what you're trying to do. So if you're doing visitor tracking and you're looking at how long someone stayed in an exhibit, you're definitely going to want to put that in a quantitative nature. But if you're doing visitor tracking to look at how they move through space, if you're looking at like 10 or so people and you're taking notes on how that goes, there might be overlap within the notes that you might want to display in a qualitative fashion to be like, from my notes, I saw that all these people were doing X, Y, and Z and moving in this way. So that one's going to be up to you and what you are trying to get out of that. And then the spatial analysis is qualitative in nature, and a narrative will suffice. So looking at how the space within the room is used, you're going to want to write up something on that. But then accompanied visits, this is definitely a mixed methods one. So this one utilizes both qualitative and quantitative because of the fact that in the moment you know how many people are going to be there. You can easily get demographic data, but then also people are telling you in real time how they feel about this exhibit because it's intimate in nature with you accompanying them through this. Again, all of these, it's going to be up to you. What I aim to do with this was to just give you a sense of how they're normally done. But, depending upon the story that you are trying to tell, that's really going to determine the type of data that you want to use, how you want to display that data, how you want to go through it. Yes.
I have an interesting example, particularly when you think about exhibits, space, and patterns. So there was, I went to a workshop where they were trying to design a space that would be suitable for people with different kinds of abilities. So people who were in wheelchairs, people who were in walkers, people who needed to get close to be able to use Braille, people who needed to have earphones or whatever for audio. So basically, one of the things they did, they had a layout, like a floor plan, and they kind of traced how people were using it and where were the bottlenecks, where did people get stuck, where did people end up passing by because they couldn't figure out how to access it for themselves, either, like, for example, people in wheelchairs, it was too, the exhibit was placed too high for them. Or the space between one part of the exhibit and another installation was too narrow. If there were other people in the space, they couldn't get themselves through. So it was really an interesting. It was in a design rather than an outcome evaluation. It was in really a planning kind of thing. But I can see how that would be really useful to, especially, for example, if you had a camera. I mean, if you had you were recording what was happening and you of course have to let everybody know that that's happening and so on and whatever. But I mean, that could tell you something about how long people stay at exhibit, which ones they go to, what's the pattern they go to. If you're trying to tell a story that's got chronology to it, but they're not going that direction, maybe it says that chronology isn't that important to them, or that your layout isn't clear, one or the other. So I thought that was a really interesting approach they used to answer the questions that they had, were really about design questions. How do we make the space maximally useful?
Monica, this is my jam.
I was about to say, yeah, absolutely. I love Gigi, and Gigi's been teaching me a lot about this, and I'm really obsessed with these like observational and spatial ways of like determining success within spaces because they're so cool. I think what my favorite example that she's told me about is like the way she's talking about the way that like forums are set up and how like the row by row listed as much talk as like the circular powwow that you have for listening discussion. Like, it's so interesting the way that space just influences so much about a program.
I think it's a common thing that you see in museum exhibits. I come from the museum world, as I've already mentioned, and when possible, and you can, there's certainly ways with a bigger budget that you can prototype exhibits and things like that. But I have done them. for no cost, printer low cost, not no cost, printing out, different versions of exhibits, for example, laying them out in a room the way that you imagine it to be. And that can really give you some helpful information about things as simple as the size of the type, whether you can read it. Becomes really important to know. I think I told the story last time of a museum where I worked, where I actually got to open a brand new museum. That was really cool. You don't get to do that a lot in your museum career in general. But the museum was designed for people to walk in the space and go to the left. And man, everybody who walked in went to the right. Everybody. So then it just, maybe if we had tested in that space and had the opportunity to do that, we would have recognized that there was just the natural flow went exactly the opposite way of what we had anticipated. Thankfully, I don't think it negatively impacted people's experience. But
maybe I'm interested. I'm just a quick. So maybe that's because we're American and, our driving traffic is that geared. But if we were European or English, we would be going the other way.
I never went down into the demographics to ask for country of origin. Maybe everybody who drove on the left would have gone to the left. No, we thought it would be the case because there is a lot more open space to the left than to the right. But I guess people thought they were supposed to go where there was a density of experience. Anyway, totally random thing. Mike's comment is great. We've given up trying to predict how visitors will move through an exhibition. I don't blame you. It's almost impossible to know sometimes. But I love these. I love all of these examples. I'm going to move us along for just a moment because we're actually coming to the end of our more presentational part, and we're going to start getting into the details for the people who are here today of your particular workshopping evaluations for the program that you're going to do. Stick with me for a minute. I want to just make a few announcements so that I'm not keeping anybody at the very end, and we have plenty of time to work on that. Any organization who's attended any of these evaluation sessions who would like to, and attended counts as watching them online anytime you wish. You are invited to sign up for a one-on-one session with our very own Montrell Sanders to talk about very specific things related to evaluation in your institution, or more broadly about evaluation. To schedule a one-on-one session with him between now and when his internship ends, which is the end of July, you should just go ahead and email him directly at msanders@njhumanities.org. I'm putting that in the chat as well. If you have any trouble, please just contact us through New Jersey Council for the Humanities. This will also be in the notes that we put up after this session, once they go up on our In the Weeds page on our website as well. All of our In the Weeds programs, as I mentioned, are available. Past program recordings, future opportunities coming up, notes and things like that. njhumanities.org is our website. Go under programs for In the Weeds and you'll see them there. The recording and notes for this session will be up and available by the end of this week. So you can expect those in the next couple of days as soon as we get them posted. Next up for In the Weeds is a two-part series on hybrid programs. So we're all thinking about how we're going to do our programs in person, how we're going to do our programs virtually, and how about doing those two things together? Oh yeah. Make it as maximally difficult as we possibly can, right? Yes. That's what we do. But in all seriousness, we have great examples of organizations that are doing this work. And some of them are going to be here to talk about their experiences. So it's a two-part series, as I mentioned. Part one is all about planning and developing hybrid programs, all of those steps that you need to take. So really drilling down with a couple of guest grantees and program partners that NJCH has worked with, and programs that they've supported, to talk about their experiences, the good, the bad, the ugly, the learning experiences, and the successes of doing hybrid programs. And then the second part is really getting brass tacks, right? Real logistics with an organization that helps other arts and cultural nonprofits to do these kinds of programs. So everything from like, what kind of microphones do you need to what are some platforms that can really help you facilitate this kind of work. So we are still finalizing those dates. We have been interrupted by COVID as much as everybody else has, but they'll be taking place at the end of June, beginning in July kind of timeframe. So stay tuned on our website and through our newsletter for those details. I'm going to stop recording now. It's been great to have all of you in the room, and we're going to get into some details and workshop some of your ideas. So thank you so much. We'll see the rest of you again very soon.